Welcome everybody to this wonderful program sponsored by the Touro College Jacob D. Fuchsberg Law Center. My name is Rabbi Moshe Krupka. I have the privilege of serving as the Executive Vice President of the Touro College and University System. And we want to welcome each and every one of you to this presentation featuring the Bruce K. Gould Book Award being presented this evening to U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar. We're thrilled to have the senator with us and to hear her, not only on her book, which is being awarded this evening, but also her leadership role in this country, which, if I could sum up her career and her personality, she's been quoted as saying, "I think civility is important to getting things done." And she exudes that with exuberance and with passion and with tremendous integrity. And we're just thrilled to have her with us here this evening. Touro this year is celebrating its 50th anniversary. 50 years ago, this institution started with 35 undergraduate students, and today we boast a worldwide enrollment of nearly 19,000 students in 35 schools and 246 programs in 5 states at 26 locations and in 4 countries around the world. And certainly a jewel in the crown of the Touro College and University System is our Jacob D. Fuchsberg Law Center. This evening, we not only celebrate a great author and a great patriot and a great leader, but we also celebrate 50 years of service to the community. And nowhere is that service more palpable and more in evidence than in our alumni. Bruce Gould is not only a former student leader of our law center. He was president of the Student Bar Association, but he has been a wonderful, generous, involved alum who has taken leadership roles not only in our law center, but also within the university system as a whole. He serves on the Board of Governors of the Law Center, as well as the chair of the Board of Governors of the Touro College and University System. And nothing gives us more pride than to see our alumni successful and embracing the legacy of their education through their alma mater and strengthening our institution, in particular at the law school, as well as throughout the university system. It's really my pleasure and honor to introduce the patron of this award evening this evening, my dear friend and someone who I respect tremendously, Mr. Bruce Gould.
Thank you, Rabbi, for the warm and wonderful introduction. I couldn't have said better things, and you're truly an inspiration. Dean Langan, members of the Touro community, members of the judiciary, students, friends, and especially our distinguished award recipient, United States Senator Amy Klobuchar. It is with great pleasure that I welcome all of you to the 2021 presentation of the Gould Book Award. This award began almost 35 years ago as Dean Emeritus Howard Glickstein, who's with us tonight on the call, and the then Director of Development at the time, Steve Israel, who, by the way, went on to have an extremely successful career in the U.S. House of Representatives, and I discussed the notion of creating a program that would encompass my affiliation with legal publishing and my love of books. We discussed a number of ideas and eventually created this award to honor the author of the year's outstanding publication related to the law, the legal profession, and our legal system. I don't think any of us could have imagined how much of an impact the award would have on the student body and the legal community, the quality, variety, prestige of the recipients, and the tremendous positive impact on the reputation of the school has been amazing. The award has taken on a life of its own and has become one of the leading legal literary awards in the country. Over the years, recipients of this award have always been insightful, fascinating, and presented their book at just the right moment. Some of my personal favorites has been Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, who spoke on her life on the Supreme Court shortly before she announced her retirement. We had Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who spent an entire day at the law school in Central Islip and discussing warm and wonderful details, the trials and tribulations of her rise to the highest court in the land. Alan Dershowitz presented an inspiring discussion of the genesis of justice, 10 stories of biblical injustice that led to the 10 commandments of modern law. We had Bob Woodward spoke about the war within, a secret White House history. Ambassador Stuart Eisenstadt gave us a detailed account of an imperfect justice, looted assets, slave labor, and the unfinished business of World War II. And in the months before the pandemic, we were able to meet and hear the legend himself, the renowned author John Grisham, for his book, The Rooster Bar. And it was really nice to hear him and his thoughts on legal education, as well as his work with the Innocence Project. U.S. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan was one of our first recipients for his book on the Law of Nations, and U.S. Senator Christopher Dodd was our 17th award recipient for his Letters from Nuremberg. And tonight, I am so privileged to welcome the Honorable Amy Klobuchar as the recipient of the Gould Award for her book, Antitrust, Taking on Monopoly, Power from the Gilded Age to the Digital Age. Senator, I'm thrilled to have you with us tonight. Antitrust regulation is such a timely, important topic in our community. With the power of social media and the advancement of technology, I commend you for bringing this important issue to the forefront with the publication of this book. Dean Langan, I congratulate you for putting on another fantastic evening. To the Law Center's Advancement Office, kudos on the job well done. On behalf of the law school, myself, my family, I want to welcome you all to this very special evening, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. Now,
all right.
My privilege to turn the program over to Dean Elena Langan, who arrived at Touro in August 2019. Dean, it is hard to come to a new job and a new place, trying to get your feet wet, but just after 6 months at Touro, the world turned upside down, as we all know, and everything became virtual. Everything had to be reorganized. A new norm was created overnight. Dean, you did an unbelievable job making it all happen seamlessly, and I want to thank you for being such a great leader. I don't think many people could have done what you did. This is Dean Langan's second Gould Award, and both of them have been virtual events, and I think I can speak for everybody. We're looking forward to the day when we can have these events in person again. And Dean Langan, would you please do us the honor of introducing Senator Amy Klobuchar from the great state of Minnesota.
Oh.
Thank you, Bruce, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you for your continued support of the Law Center. As you indicated, it was a rough few months when I first started here, and then the pandemic hit. But the Gould Award is always one of the highlights of our social season, as it were, at the law school. And I want to thank you for your continued support. So Amy Klobuchar, our recipient today, is the senior senator from Minnesota and the first woman from that state to be elected to the U.S. Senate. She currently serves as chair of the Senate Antitrust Subcommittee. She was born in Plymouth, Minnesota, and graduated from Yale University and the University of Chicago Law School. Senator Klobuchar has authored several books, including the memoir, The Senator Next Door, and the book for which she is being honored this evening, dealing with antitrust and monopolies throughout her, as she calls it, from the Gilded Age to the Digital Age. In this book, the senator provides a fascinating history of the antitrust movement, outlining what led to the present movement and offering achievable solutions to prevent monopolies, promote business competition, and encourage innovation. At this point, I would ask that Bruce present the award to Senator Klobuchar.
So we've kind of gotten the hang of this. The senator has received the award prior to the thing. That's how we can do this in this Zap digital world. And I would ask if the senator would mind holding up the award if she has it in front of her.
Yes.
And I will read the inscription for everybody. It says the Bruce Gay Gould Book Award presented to Senator Amy Klobuchar, author of Antitrust, taking on monopoly power from the Gilded Age to the Digital Age, November 10th, 2021. Congratulations. And on behalf of my family, the law school, the college and university, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Bruce. And thank you for being such a great alum and caring about the school, the law, and really passing on the torch with everything you learned to a generation of students. Thank you, Rabbi. I know you're going to spend a little time with your daughter, well deserved. But I wanted to say thank you, and it was good getting to know you a bit. I was just amazed at the incredible leaders, Dean, you, and the rest of the leaders at the Law Center have had come there. Let's see, Grisham, right? As you just mentioned, Bruce, and Sonia Sotomayor, Sandra Day O'Connor, as I consider them today, my warm-up act, okay? But it just is an amazing honor to get this. And this book was a act of love written before I ran for president, the history part of it, and then a little bit during, but mostly right after I got out after the right before Super Tuesday. So it was really also cathartic to put some of my thoughts and focus on something really deeply important like this. My husband, as I note in the book, should be here too. He's actually teaching tonight at Baltimore Law School. He wrote all the footnotes. And if the students don't read every one, I completely understand. But we had no ghostwriter, and so it was, and it turned out to be the timeliest moment to put the book out. It even got on the New York Times bestseller list, the first antitrust book ever for a while. And but this is really a true honor, and I look forward to visiting the law school and seeing all of you in person. But I'm looking forward to some question and answer right now, but I want to thank you very, very much. It really means a lot. And by the way, we have a lot of books in our house. I should have done this in front of my bookshelves, but this will be so great. I can have it, I can look at it all the time. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. We will be doing a Q&A with the senator, but I do want to let everyone know that if you do have questions related to the book, please enter them into the chat. And as we wrap up some of the questions that I have for the senator, if we have time, we will take questions from the audience. So, Senator, my first question for you is, what motivated you to write a book about antitrust?
Well, I actually, when you go way back, like a lot of the students probably, I love the game Monopoly. And I thought that was what our economy was about, actually, buy a bunch of hotels, when I was growing up, buy a bunch of the houses, maybe if you're lucky, get the Park Place, and not land on the luxury tax. So that was how I was first introduced to monopolies. And from there, I go on. My dad worked for a newspaper, so I heard a lot about consolidation and those things. And then I went on to graduate from college and law school, and I ended up representing MCI in the private sector when I was in Minnesota. And that was after AT&T had been broken up. So I learned a lot about it firsthand from a practitioner's experience when I was at a law firm. And then I end up, I'm skipping a lot of my life, but I end up, suddenly in the US Senate and the Antitrust Subcommittee. And I started seeing this competition issues cropping up across our economy. As John Oliver, he just last year did a half-hour segment on consolidation, and he was explaining how you see it in so many different parts of our economy, from online travel to cat food to caskets. And at the very end, he said, if this is enough to make all of you want to die, good luck, because there's only 3 casket makers left. And actually, I had to call him and tell him it's really only 2 because one bought the other. And so it's not just, while tech has gotten a lot of interest lately, it's not just that. And then I started looking at the history. I love history. And I looked back and saw how this really movement started way back when our country was founded, because people who came to America, they wanted religious freedom. Yes, they wanted a political freedom, but they also wanted economic freedom. They didn't want to buy all their tea from a monopoly tea company. That was part of the Tea Party. It wasn't just taxation without representation. And they were entrepreneurs in spirit. And the Constitution comes about, doesn't really mention monopolies, but there's a huge bunch of discussion about it. And at one point, one of the founding fathers says, Heather, don't worry, we'll take care of this. And it took about 100 years, but see, we had gridlock back then. And then finally, Senator Sherman, who is a Republican from Ohio, came along and passed the Sherman Act. And then Teddy Roosevelt rode his horse of, not just his real horse, but the antitrust horse into the White House in taking on the trust, hence the name Antitrust, which back then were things like Standard Oil and the Beef Trust and dozens and dozens of different trusts. And it was a real political movement back then. So then I looked at it to the current and I thought, wow, this is what's going on right now, but we don't have farmers out with pitchforks. And it's become really the province of economists and lawyers, and it makes it really hard to make the political case yet. It's affecting people in their everyday lives, especially when it comes to the tech center with 20% of the total value of the stock market. And we haven't done anything to change our laws or to adapt. And things, in my mind, and this is before we saw what we've seen the last few years, we're getting worse and worse and worse. So that's why I decided, well, why don't I connect up the history, which I thought would help people to get to the point to realize this has always been bipartisan. It's about capitalism. It is about respecting capitalism and the economy, and you really can't have that. It was Adam Smith, the godfather of capitalism, who warned the founders of our country, and he's believed in the invisible hand and everything, but he always warned them about the standing army of monopolies, was his words, and how you always had to watch out for that in a capitalist system. And over time, we've always rejuvenated capitalism by enforcing the laws or passing new laws. And it's been decades and decades since we've responded in any way to what's going on in our economy. So I thought all of that was worth a book. I just didn't expect it would be such a long book with 200 pages of footnotes, but that's what happens when you start writing things. And so I did it over a number of years, and I am really proud of what we did. I also tried to make it really accessible. So there's over 100 cartoons that I found myself, actually. With my husband's help, he also looked for them. And so we kind of made it fun. And then I also tried to make it very personal, telling some of my stories and other stories that would bring this esoteric, sometimes esoteric part of the law to life.
And that was one of the interesting aspects of the book, is that you do weave in some of your personal experiences. So can you expand a little more about what your involvement has been with antitrust actions and the antitrust movement?
Well, one of the things I tell about is in my own state, James J. Hill was one of the original steel trust and railroad trust, especially railroad trust guys. And when I was growing up, he had, right around the same time that my great-grandparents came from Slovenia. And I tell the story of the immigrants back then, how they would go through Ellis Island and get on a train and then get on another train and get on another train and didn't know the language, and had their names pinned on their shirts. And my relatives, of course, end up in Ely, Minnesota, near the Canadian border, where it's really cold right now. It was a pretty godforsaken place. And so they had, the mines had come in, the iron ore mines, and they had company housing and the like. And so while they were doing this work, which for them, and I make this very clear in the book, it wasn't a negative. They wanted a new life for their kids. You know, they didn't want the Austrian Empire, the Habsburg Empire telling them where, which kids could go to school. So, but it was a really tough life. And my grandpa had to quit basically junior high because his parents were sick. He was the oldest boy of 9. Ended up, they died, and he worked in the mines his whole life, and the unions made them safer. But while all that was going on with my great grandparents, James J. Hill was building this big house literally the same year they were coming over. He was building this big house. And I remember my mom, when I was growing up, I would go to piano lessons, and she would drive me in her red Comet car, and we would go by to see all the houses, and we would always drive by, and I always felt like ducking down because she would show me big houses. And one of the ones we would drive by was James J. Hill. And as I said, my grandpa and my great grandpa and my grandmas as well, didn't literally build the house, but they pretty much did. And so just that family history, like so many histories in America, was really a part of the movement for workers, but also the movement to break up some of the big monopolies. In fact, the very first case that Teddy Roosevelt, his attorney general, successfully brought was a case against James J. Hill and some other monopolists. And so it just shows the circle of all this. And he was from St. Paul, Minnesota. So that was how I first heard about all this. And then I went on, and when I looked at the history, I guess another thing that really interested me, there were so many women that were behind the scenes. The first woman that actually was the most famous muckraker was Ida Tarbell, who wrote this book on Standard Oil that really changed the way people thought of Standard Oil and led to the cases brought against Standard Oil, started during Teddy Roosevelt and then finished later during the Progressive era. Or the woman that Lizzie McGee, who invented the Monopoly Board, and she actually came up with the idea, and she had 2 boards. Was this inventive woman way ahead of her time. One looked very similar to Monopoly Board. The other was more based on her own political beliefs of socialism, which was basically monopolies were bad. And what happened was this guy, Darrow, who's in Atlantic City, must have seen one of them, developed one exactly like it. And she had literally, you see her boards, and she ended up getting just $500, and he became very rich when Parker Brothers wrote him a check. And I know it's the first time in the history of the world where a man got credits for a woman's work. That's a joke. But the point is that that was also an interesting part of the history in all of this, as you go through how we get to modern day. And I just am a big believer, having worked in the private sector for about 14 years, 15 years before I became a prosecutor, and before I went to the Senate. I'm a big believer in capitalism. I want it to work, and to make it work, you got to make sure that you can allow small businesses to compete, and that they can get big too if they want. And you've got to make sure that customers and consumers are treated fairly. And right now we're living in this moment where, I guess I'll quote Mark Zuckerberg, probably not the last time on our discussion today, in one of the emails that was discovered in the House investigation, where he said, "I'd rather buy than compete." And that was the whole idea of antitrust, came up around this idea that you want competition. Competition is good. You can have competition for labor that way. You can have competition for ideas. You don't have dominant companies that control everything, because what happened over time, over and over again, when that happens, you don't have the competition and the competitive companies that develop the bells and whistles, which may be lesser prices, or it may be new ideas. And you can also just have all kinds of bad behaviors and exclusionary conduct that make it hard for new people to get in. And by the way, that's another interesting factor for women and for people of color and people that weren't always at the table. There's an old saying in politics, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And so, you know, for those people that aren't there, it's even harder when you have monopoly companies for them to come up and be able to, they can start a business, sure, but can they keep that business going in a monopoly environment?
Let's talk a little bit more about Facebook. What challenges do you see based on the current antitrust laws in breaking up those monopoly efforts of places like Facebook, Amazon, all of those large tech companies that we see forming, Google?
Mm-hmm. Well, now that Facebook changed its name, I mean, there's no problems at all. No. Okay, so one of the issues that's come up, and part of this, and I'm sure the professors and other people could back me up on this, there's over time, the courts, based on Supreme Court rulings, actually have become more and more conservative and more limited in their interpretations of the antitrust laws, right? It wasn't really about tech. It was about all kinds of mergers and whether or not companies should be allowed to combine, and whether or not, looking back in time, that the industry was too concentrated. So for a while, the law was really going full speed ahead, and the spirit of the antitrust law was really clear. When you look at the language of the Sherman Act, you look at the congressional history, and you look at the AT&T breakup, which by all accounts was a big success, brought down rates for long distance and brought up the cell phone market, which before that had been kind of dormant with cell phones the size. So this will date me for any of the students that have seen this movie, but there's an old movie called Wall Street. And in the movie, there's a character called Gordon Gekko, and he had a cell phone that was like the size of a briefcase. And that was kind of where we were back then. So that was a heyday of antitrust through different administrations, Democratic and Republican presidents. With different administrations doing more or less, I will say that, but that case came through several administrations. Then you fast forward to where we are now, and the issue is in the tech area. At first, everyone thought, cool, all these new devices, this is so great. And they said, don't do anything, just let us do it, trust us, we're okay. And pretty soon you say, whoa, you've got Apple dominant in one area, no one's even close to them. You've got Facebook dominant in one, no one is close to them. You've got Google dominant in the search engine, and then you've got Amazon dominant in online retail. And what happens? Okay, here's some examples. Country of Australia, pretty advanced country. They decide they want to start charging Facebook and Google for links and content on behalf of their newspapers. They want to make them pay the news organizations for the content at a higher rate because they see it breaking down their democracy, their news. And those two companies, as only dominant platforms can do, say, no, we're going to leave. Good luck, because Microsoft said they'd step up, but I think Bing had like 3 or 4% market share. And you can see what a dominant company can do. Now, in that case, they didn't follow through on their threat because all over the world, including primarily in the US and in Europe, there was such an outcry against what they were doing. Or you'll have things like the app stores where Apple, in this case, Apple and Google say, okay, you're going to pay 30%, anyone that advertises on our platforms, and they kind of arbitrarily picking which ones. Uber doesn't have to, but Match.com does. And we're going to say that you cannot tell your customers that they can get a lesser price on your own website. Yet you could say, okay, well, that's too bad. You're on their platform. It's the only real platform they can go on. Apple for Apple food, Apple for Apple phones, and Google for the rest of them. Look at what is happening with Amazon, for instance, and I'm going to get to Facebook last. Amazon, where it comes to what we just learned with the Wall Street Journal reporting and other news organizations. People advertise, small businesses, medium businesses, and lo and behold, because they're starting their own brands, they suddenly copied a luggage organizer of someone that had revealed their plans and had tried to simply advertise and sell their products on their platforms. And we've seen numerous examples of this. And then finally with Facebook, I don't think anyone on this webinar doesn't know of some of the problems of Facebook. And if you haven't, you should read The Ugly Truth by two New York Times reporters, which really goes through the business model. And I just think people always thought, cool, they started this, Mark Zuckerberg started this in college, it's, and then it grew and was really successful. Well, there's some merit to that. He probably never intended some of the consequences that were to happen or even wants them to happen, but they've happened. And that's because it's such a Wild West. Their market concept was, okay, the more we can get people's data and the more we can target ads to the people, then we make more money. And a lot of people don't know their data is being taken. You may not know, Dean, that every quarter Facebook makes $51 off of you. It's the highest on the end users because there's no real limits, there's no federal privacy law that applies here. So they're constantly mining data, giving it to advertisers. Now wait, it gets worse. How do they most keep you on these devices? Well, they learned over time that the most polarized emotional content keeps you on devices more, the more addictive content. And we just found out because of the whistleblower, and I wondered why my Facebook page, which was always really great, kind of stalled out and went bad a few years ago. Well, the anger emoji, and as you can guess, I'm a little more in the middle politically, the anger emoji had 5 times the traction when they changed their algorithms as the like. So what do you think happens? So everyone does either intensely partisan content, angry content in the political realm. And then finally, what we learned from Frances Haugen, the whistleblower, was how then they would also be targeting when kids just get on there and they're doing a paper on nutrition, suddenly they get pounded with various links and accounts about things like, I want to be perfect, and starving to death and things like that. Literally promoting anorexia and eating disorders. So that's just one of the many problems, not to mention that because they're a dominant platform and they bought Instagram, we never know if Instagram could have developed the bells and whistles for more privacy and misinformation, and that would have maybe required registration of who people are or done other things eventually. We don't know because they bought them. And they bought everything in sight. And so that's what happens when you have a monopoly, and what the problem is with these tech monopolies that is somewhat unique in the economy, and also the inability of Washington to pass anything. One, because everyone trusted them for a long time and it was complicated. Washington's never good at long-term problems that are complicated. And 2, because of all the money being thrown around, 2 to 3 lobbyists for every member of Congress, huge amounts of money, huge amounts of spending. Number 1 and number 2 spending on lobbying is tech, 2 tech companies.
Well, are there any aspects of the antitrust laws that would help solve that monopoly issue, especially for the tech companies? And why don't current laws really successfully address that issue?
Well, you do have laws that can be used, very resource intensive. And then I think you also need to make the laws more sophisticated to match the sophisticated nature of our economy. That's not like some crazy radical approach, because we've updated the laws over and over again, from the Clayton Act to Hart-Scott-Rodino to many changes that were made to the antitrust laws over time. The existing laws, of course, do provide some basis for claims. And that's why the FTC brought the case against Facebook. You already see some of the headwinds they ran into based on court precedent. They're refiling that case. State AGs are also doing it. And then the Department of Justice Antitrust brought a major case against Google. It's important to note both of these cases were brought during the Trump administration. Again, when you look back in history, by 2 capable people. Macon Delrahim led the DOJ antitrust during Trump, and he also, by the way, supports the Biden nominee for antitrust, Jonathan Cantor. And then Commissioner Simon, the chair of the FTC during the last administration, brought the Facebook case. This is relevant because you see a continuation of work between Republican and Democratic administration that's actually really important when you look back in history. So they have these cases, but few things. One, they're going to have to continue with Lena Khan in the FTC, the chairwoman there. They're going to have to continue this work, continue finding ways, given the restrictive court precedents, that they can bring on these cases. But they also need the resources. I was texting back and forth with Senator Grassley about something somewhat related today. And he and I successfully passed in the Senate a bill to update the merger fees with over $100 million going to the agencies. The bill we're considering when we get back to the Senate in the weeks to come also includes, at my urging, significant resources for DOJ antitrust and for the FTC. You cannot take on the biggest companies the world has ever known with duct tape and Band-Aids. So that is part of it. It's getting people in place that know what they're doing. It is bringing the cases with bipartisan support, which we have here, check, right? It's getting them the resources, which they don't really have right now. They can bring cases, but pursue them, check. We're on our way to doing that, in my mind. And then the next thing is looking at how we can give them more tools to bring these cases. And that's where you get to updating the laws with things like a specific bill on app stores that Senator Blumenthal and Senator Marsha Blackburn and I have. Or doing something like Senator Grassley and I have with what the comedian Samantha Bee has called the Ocean's 11 of co-sponsors, which includes Senator Graham, the former chair of the Judiciary Committee, and Senator Durbin, the current chair, Cory Booker, Mark Warner, Josh Hawley, Cynthia Lummis, Senator Daines, of course, Senator Blumenthal, Senator Hirono. And we put together this really strong group of co-sponsors to say, you cannot self-preference and put your products at the top all the time. You cannot copy other people's stuff and then rip them off and then come up with your own versions of this and then put your stuff at the top of the website. And you cannot require businesses, in order to get your products at the top of the search engine, you cannot require them to buy a bunch of other things like shipping and other things that go with it just to get their products listed at the top. So we have so many examples of this bad conduct. So that's something else you can do. And the last thing would be just mergers. Both looking backwards, you can see as the industry become too consolidated, as well as looking forwards and looking at changing our laws, not just with tech, but shifting the burden on the major mega mergers so that the merging companies, when they're above a certain humongous level, would have to prove that they don't hurt competition, as opposed to the government having to prove that they do.
Who would have thought that antitrust and monopolies would be a topic for late night comedians?
No, Colbert had a very, we had a very funny interview in which he, at one point, I told that John Oliver story, and I go, well, you won't care because there's no monopoly on comedians, right? And then live on the air, about 1 minute later, he said, get rid of that John Oliver part, take that out. I don't want that in there. And then he looked at the screen and he said, and Google, I love you. I want to be at the top of your search engine, which was so funny, but so sad because, and of course he's saying it as a joke, but that is actually the truth. A lot of companies tell us stuff. Senator Lee and myself, we chair the committee together, Senator Mike Lee and other senators, about all this horrible stuff happening to them, but they're too afraid to say it. These include major companies and little companies, because they're afraid they're going to get screwed by the dominant platform because there is no choice for them.
So what are the messages you would like readers of your book to take away?
Well, first of all, to not despair that there are things that Congress can do. I went through some of these, and we're just seeing more and more bipartisan support with Cicilline and Buck, the two representatives in the House, and with the work that Grassley and I are doing, and many others. The whistleblower was such a catalyst, not just on Facebook, but it made the parents of the country think, you know, it's not just me that's desperately trying to protect my kids. In fact, one mom told me it was like, from Brooklyn, she told me it was like, I did something with Hakeem Jeffries. She said it was like turning on the faucet and that the water was just overflowing every day out of the sink, and she's sitting there with a mop trying to clean it up. And that's how she felt about getting filters on her kids' phones, or stopping the links, or trying to get them to stop from clicking on links every single day. So I think that they're a catalyst. Clearly, the administration, by putting strong people in place, including Tim Wu, who's in the White House, and some of the other people I mentioned, getting the resources to the administration so they can do their jobs, the president's executive order. And then the third thing is what individual people can do. It's everything from shopping local to getting yourselves on the sites of places like open markets and other places that kind of give updates on what's going on with this. I have them listed. I have them listed in my book. And then just getting educated on this, especially law schools. I mean, it's not easy to do, but paying more attention to who actually owns the companies, calling and writing your senator, your member of Congress, as well as your attorney generals, for the most part, have been very aggressive on this. So I think a lot of it is sticking with Congress, trying to get them to act. And just getting and informing yourself about what's going on, because it isn't easy. It's really easy to just put your head in the sand, like, I just can't deal with this. It's too complicated. The problem is that's what our government has been doing for like 50 years, and look where we are right now when it comes to the lack of power that people feel with their own data. No federal privacy law, nothing, no change. Nothing changes to antitrust, not having enough resources in. And by the way, these are like profit makers. When our government wins these suits in antitrust cases, not just about tech, they bring suits all the time. They actually can bring in more money than we pay them to do the work, because there's so many egregious examples out there of bad behavior. And so that's another thing to remember. So all of that just means we need to, especially law students and lawyers, need to talk about this to people and take it on. And it doesn't mean you're against tech. I mean, I use a phone like everyone else, and it doesn't mean that at all. In fact, you want to have the next Google started somewhere and the next Amazon. You want to be able to rejuvenate that. You just want to have an even playing field for competition.
Well, I could spend hours talking with you about this topic, but I know we have some questions in the chat box. So I am now going to turn this over to Provost Patty Salkin, and she's going to take over the Q&A with questions from the audience.
Thank you, Dean Langan, and thank you, Senator. Reading your book made me wish I had this 33 years ago when I took antitrust in law school, rather than just reading all of those DOJ cases and not having the context of all of the corporations. And then I wondered, I started my Hanukkah shopping because we're just a couple of weeks away, and I saw in the store the other day that instead of Monopoly, there's a game now called Anti-Monopoly, and now I'm wondering if it was motivated by your book.
Right.
And the players are either competitors or monopolists.
Yeah, no, there's a whole crazy, I'm not going to go on, but there's a crazy history of there was this professor in San Francisco who then wanted to have the anti-monopolies thing, kind of that Lizzie Maggie idea. And then he started it. Then he got sued by Parker Brothers. It was at the time owned by General Mills in Minnesota. Then at some point they buried all of his games underneath the frozen tundra in Mankato, Minnesota. Then he won the suit years later, came back and tried to get out. That's when he realized the ground was frozen and he couldn't get them. It's a lot of crazy stuff. So I don't know if this is still his idea, but that is fascinating that that's happening. That's a good.
It's made its way into the department stores.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start it off before I go to the questions in the audience. I was thinking as I read the first chapter in the book, and you talked about the Ovation example and the drugs to treat PDA, and then you mentioned the Epipen, and I was right there going through the Epipen crisis on cost with my son, and I'm wondering how you see that example, and then all of a sudden at the same time we have like 3 vaccines for COVID coming onto the market. Did something happen so that one company didn't corner the market and we kept price down?
No. taxpayer investment, which was good, in research and things like that, and a crisis. But yeah, the story it tells about indomethacin, a heart life-saving drug for newborns. And what happened was one company bought the other company. There were only 2 drugs on the market, and suddenly the price shot up, like from a couple hundred or wherever it was to 1,600 a dose. It was unbelievable. And the FTC brought a suit, and they ended up, based on some conservative Eighth Circuit rulings, they ended up losing. It was really quite outrageous, and it's been roundly criticized for what the decision was. But that was my first as a senator, holding up the little vial of the medication, asking the FTC if they could help. And I'm so glad you brought up the pharmaceutical examples, because one of the things that is like real life happening, Secretary Becerra was just in Minnesota, is that we are trying to get authority for Medicare to negotiate prices for drugs. And this has been my bill I've led for a long time. It is completely related, because there's just so much power in the pharmaceutical companies. It doesn't mean they don't do good things and they didn't give us the vaccine. Once again, just like tech. But if we do nothing to rein it in, we become victims, and we're paying the highest prices of any country for drugs right now, even though we put in all this research. So we're going at it that way. There's huge bipartisan support for some patent bills and other things, and the pharmaceuticals paying off generic competitors to keep their products off the market. Senator Grassley and I have a bill on that. And again, with the resources in those 2 agencies, they will have a much better ability to take on these cases. But I love that you brought up the pharma example. I had neglected to bring it up.
So one of the other things that you mentioned in your recommendations and the path forward is trying to encourage more grassroots, startup, small entrepreneurs. And you even said shop locally. So you shamed me because I got the book from Amazon because I needed it quickly and they would deliver it in a day. But I'm wondering, what incentives do you think that state governments and the federal government can offer to small minority women-owned businesses, small entrepreneurs, people just graduating from school,
Sure.
who have to invest lots of money in navigating through all of the government regulations? We've got safety regulations, and then what else?
Okay, so there's a whole bunch of things actually unrelated to antitrust, in addition to all this stuff I've talked about with updating our laws. And it is things like investing, small business investing, including in Washington, in these small businesses and women-owned, minority-owned businesses. It is about capital and making sure, crowdsourcing, that we've made it easier for some of these companies to start up. It's about non-compete agreements. And you've heard recently how they were actually applying them to line workers in fast food restaurants, which makes no sense at all. And that was a huge deal. And using those for limited purposes so that labor and people who work at places can start their own businesses, and just really looking at it that way. It is buying local, but it's also evening the playing field for small businesses. I had a business owner in tears. I did a call with some yesterday, and just with all the supply chain issues, which are about a bunch of things, as we know, the pandemic, everything. But if the dominant carriers are using all the trucks, she's going to get out of business. So it is really, there are a lot of problems right now because we have so much concentration. And the answer to me is all these things I laid out to make it more fair, and pass some bills that I don't consider radical to make it more fair, get the resources to the agencies, and then start looking more carefully at these mergers. It was when Zuckerberg bought Instagram right before that, and WhatsApp around that time period, he sent another email and it said, these brands may be nascent, but their brands are known and they could be disruptive to us. About why and you think about that, that's capitalism. It's supposed to be disruptive. New companies come in. Tech is supposed to be disruptive. He's basically saying we're going to buy them even though they're small because they could be disruptive to us. So looking back at some of those mergers, I think it's going to be really important.
So we have a question from a law student. Do you think the passage of a federal privacy and data protection law would assist in handling the large monopoly issues we're seeing in the tech sector? And if so, do you foresee a comprehensive privacy law being passed and signed into law in the near future?
Yeah, no, I'll put my other hat on. I'm also on the Senate Commerce Committee led by Maria Cantwell of Washington State, and she has been in negotiations on working on that. And I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to come together on that. And that's a lot because of the whistleblower. Two things that come out of the whistleblower, maybe three. One is a federal privacy law. And we know when Apple said to their customers recently, you know, you can keep your data private, made it very clear, not 75% of the customers said, keep my data private. So we're well aware that an aggressive privacy law is something that the platforms, these other platforms don't really want, because that's how they make their money. But doing that without, and because we have a patchwork of laws right now, but we want to make sure the federal law is strong enough and doesn't undercut some of the work that the states are doing. And so that's one thing. The second is the children's privacy law, updating that bill that Senator Markey is working on. Would be a very good idea. It hasn't been updated for decades, and that kind of gets at some of the whistleblower stuff. The third thing is what I mentioned, the algorithms. And the way I look at this is, if you're in a theater, and someone yells fire, that's not protected speech. All the law students know that. But the theater, if they have ample exits and everything, they may get sued. They may not be successful if they've done everything right safety wise. What if the theater put in speakers in all of their multiplex theaters, so when someone yelled fire, it got broadcast in every single of their other 10 theaters, and then there were stampedes? Okay, that's different, and that's what algorithms do. They amplify speech. The comments themselves, you might not be able to do much except to get off hateful speech and other things right away. But when they're amplifying this, to me, that's a whole different level of liability. And right now they're protected from doing that. They can do that without any lawsuits. So that's another approach, as well as these other things that I've laid out, and antitrust. So the answer to the question in short, privacy is yes, one important approach, but there's a lot of other ones as well. And that is more of a regulatory approach, which is necessary. To me, antitrust is more of a, let's see what the market can develop if we let it, in addition to some regulations.
So you mentioned early in your talk with the dean about the breakup of the phone company into the baby bells, and it's in the book, and somebody asks a question, what's your confidence level in the tech companies being broken up?
Well, that's going to depend on what these suits bring, right? And I am very open to divesting, and the word breakup is so loaded, although the chairman of AT&T, when they broke off the baby bells into different regions, because remember, AT&T had both a horizontal monopoly, which meant over the phone service, but it also had a vertical monopoly over all the electronics and stuff that went into the phone service. I love this. When it says no caller ID, it means it's a senator, but for the record, I'm blowing them off. Okay, so you had a horizontal and a vertical monopoly going on. And so when they got broken up, the chairman of AT&T, former chairman, actually said they came out of it a stronger company. And so that's what we have to look at here. So if the courts decide, and if the cases are successful, they would simply be divesting some of their assets if they believe that they are anti-competitive. That happens all the time in antitrust cases. There'll be a merger and they'll say, okay, we're going to okay this merger, but not in this area. You have to sign a consent decree saying you're not going to compete because you two merged companies would be the only thing in town in that area, or you're not going to, you're going to allow separate competitors. You're going to divest that part. One of you is of your merged company, so they're allowed to keep competing. See, someone else will buy it because maybe in a certain region or in a certain area. That happens all the time. So instead of sounding like it's some dramatic pulverization of tech, maybe we should be honest. This is an antitrust tool, and it's something where no one wants to destroy these companies. We simply want to allow for more competition. And I think they're going to do pretty well on their own if some of their assets are divested. This is my funniest thing. Amazon has recently been saying that Senator Grassley and I are trying to destroy Amazon Prime. We have no intention, and we were really careful how we wrote that bill so it wouldn't do it, but that makes us sound like really bad guys. So we're up against a lot, honestly, and that's why I so appreciate everyone listening to this during this book award, which means so much to me, so people start understanding why this is so difficult and why it's so important.
Dean, do we have time for any more questions? I do have other questions, but I'm noticing it's about 7 o'clock.
Yeah, I think it's time to wrap things up. Like I said, I think we could have gone on and on with some of the interesting topics that are covered in the book. I want to thank you, Senator, for being with us this evening and giving us your valuable time and your valuable perspective. I also want to, again, extend our appreciation to Bruce Gould, who is the benefactor of this award and has brought in some wonderful speakers. And you, of course, come to mind when we talk about that. I do want to remind everybody that you can get this book. It's called Antitrust: Taking on Monopoly Power from the Gilded Age to the Digital Age. And based on what we've talked about today, I strongly recommend you go to an independent bookseller rather than to Amazon to try to get this book. The other thing I'd like to mention before we finish today's program is that we do have our next Gould Award recipient. That event will occur in March, and I'm happy to announce that the award will be going to Senator Joe Lieberman on his book, The Centrist Solution: How We Made Government Work and Can Make It Work Again. That event will be on March 31st. You will all receive additional information, and I hope to see you at that event.
Well, Dean, when Senator Lieberman comes, you'll have to ask him who was a student in his seminar at Yale. It would be me. I wrote a paper on how Walter Mondale could run for president, complete with buttons that I designed. He will tell you the grade I got. Okay, it was good. I still have it. I have the paper with his note that he wrote to me at the end of it. And little did I know I would ever end up serving in the US Senate with him. And we grew to be friends. So be sure and note that when you have the esteemed Senator Lieberman come to your school.
That's a wonderful story and a wonderful legacy. So we have individuals who have been taught by some of our award recipients and then our award recipients here. So thank you everyone for attending this evening. Special thanks to Senator Klobuchar and her team who helped organize this event, and to everyone at the law school, including Kristen Macaron, who has been here throughout the event, managing a lot of the logistics, as well as Peter Stanisi and our IT team at the college. Thank you all for attending. We look forward to seeing you in March, which will be a live event, hopefully.
It will be. We're going to make it through, as long as I call back 2 senators that called me during we will get through this. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.